Okay. All right. Greetings to all, and greeting to my colleague and friend. And really, he's one of the top, the analyst you have on the Arab-Israeli conflict, Mr. Gaith Al-Omari. Guys, thank you very much for being here. Okay.
Thank you,
Before
Robert.
I introduce you, just let me speak a little bit about mainly the framework. Please mute yourself. At the end of the session, write your question in a chat, and then I will read it to Mr. Al-Omari. Also, for those students who are attending or who are attending now, please, send me an email who is attending. And of course, for those in the class of Dr. Rinat, again, send them an email, telling him that you attended this lecture today. Now, let me go ahead and start, by introducing Mr. Al-Omari. Mr. Al-Omari, he is the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Senior Fellow in the Washington Institute Irwin Levy Family Program on the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship, and was the former executive director of the American Task Force on Palestine. He served as advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team during the 1999-2001 permanent status talks, in addition to holding various other positions. And I can tell you this, many various positions within the Palestinian Authority. And beyond that as well. As a matter of fact, I met him a few months ago in Congress, and I listened to him, and I always pay really attention to what he say. So I am very happy to have you here, and we are going to speak about the future of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's such a big topic, and as a matter of fact, timely, topical, and very emotional and sensitive these days. Now, his talk, as a matter of fact, is the second part of the future of Arab-Israeli conflict. Olmer, Olmer, guys. Professor Olmer was here and he spoke about it. And this is what I can summarize what he said. He said, listen, I want to hope for a peaceful solution. So mainly, yes, he's worried. He sees a lot of complication, but there is a hope, and he wants to hope. Now, this is Gaith Al-Omari. Gaith, thank you very much for being with us. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Robert. I mean, it's both a pleasure and an honor, a good friend, and someone that I turn to for geostrategic analysis of the region. So it's really, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, guys. Let me start with you, the first question, and it's a generic, broad question. Really, can you provide us the context or the background against what you see or what you hope to see, or how you're gonna analyze, the Arab-Israeli conflict or the future Arab-Israeli conflict, bearing in mind, when I mentioned the Arab-Israeli conflict, mainly it's more about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict than the Arab-Israeli conflict. So guys, please, enlighten us, with this, really broad question.
Thank you, Robert. First of all, how many hours do we have? No, I'm going to try to be telegraphic, and I'm actually going to start where you ended. We talk about the term Arab-Israeli conflict. It's a term that actually, I think, confuses more than clarifies. Why? Because we're talking about three sets of conflicts which are overlapping but are distinct. We talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, maybe at the core of it, yet it is not really the only aspect of the conflict. There is the conflict between Israel and neighboring countries, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria.
Yeah.
These are countries that have an actual, territorial, military, sometimes conflict. Then we talk about the wider Arab conflict, the assumption that the Arab world, from Morocco to Yemen and everything in between, is in conflict with Israel. Each one of these actually had its own trajectory, and sometimes they overlapped, sometimes they diverged. Maybe the easiest, and I will just mention it quickly, is the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. And it's the easiest because it's a typical conflict. We can use the same kind of measures we use to look at any other global conflict to it. And when it comes to this, two of these four conflicts have been settled. Egypt had a peace treaty with Israel back in the late 70s, Jordan in the early 90s. Lebanon and Syria have not, for their own reasons, and we can go into that maybe if you want later on. But these are typical conflicts. And while, the Jordan and Egypt peace with Israel has been what they call the cold peace. It's not a warm peace, etc. There's a lot of diplomatic tensions, but it's a stable peace between them nevertheless. And even though the Syrian Israeli has not been settled, until recently, it's actually been also a very quiet front. So a conflict in theory, but inactive. The real complications come when it comes to the Palestinian Israeli versus the wider Arab Israeli. And let me start with the wider Arab Israeli. In the wider Arab Israeli conflict, there was an assumption or maybe a conventional wisdom in the Arab world since 1948, which is really even before that, the genesis of this conflict, that Arab-Israeli relations will be derivative of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What do I mean by that? I mean the idea that as long as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not resolved, then the whole Arab world would be in conflict with Israel. This defined really the narrative through since the 1940s onwards, even though this narrative was never truly accurate. I mean, we used to say, as you know, the Palestinian issue is the Arab central cause, the central issue. It overwhelmed, it overshadowed everything. In reality, that was not the case. Many Arab countries had indirect relations with Israel, informal ones, and frankly, intra-Arab tensions were often much, much more pronounced than Arab-Israeli conflicts. And the Arab-Israeli, the Palestinian issue was often used as a tool in these intra-Arab conflicts. In what we used to call the Arab Cold War, the conflict in the 1950s, 60s, between monarchies and revolutionary republics, Nasser's Egypt and al-Ba'ath parties, etc. They used this as a tool vis-a-vis their regional opponents. Now, the assumption, and this is where I see some of the most interesting shifts happening. In the past, the assumption is you can have no Arab relations with Israel unless the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is resolved. This idea of linkage. We said, Arab-Israeli relations can only happen if there is a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The idea that, again, that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is the main engine of both conflict and geostrategic relations. This started shifting maybe in the beginning of this century. And really, the shift happened after the Arab Spring, where there was a shift to the exact opposite, where we saw, and it was most manifested in the Abraham Accords, the deal that President Trump brokered in his first term between Israel and four Arab countries, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. There was a shift to the exact opposite. There was an assumption that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is irrelevant, manageable, a small bilateral one, and we can bypass it. And this is what happened with the Abraham Accords, with the exception of the UAE. The other three deals with Israel did not even mention the Palestinian issue. I think October 7th terror attack, when Hamas terrorists attacked Israel, killed 1,200 Israelis, and the 2 years of war that came after that with huge human toll in Gaza, actually challenged this assumption as well. Why did it challenge it? Because the Gaza war showed that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict could still spill over beyond the bilateral relation between the two. With the Gaza war over the last 2 years, we saw countries which were far apart, like Saudi Arabia, etc., having their national interest impacted by this. Navigation in the Red Sea, instability in Jordan and Egypt, all of that. So the spillover effect is there. And today, I think we have gotten to a point of equilibrium where the Arab world sees the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as an important conflict, but they also understand that they will not subjugate their national interest to this conflict. So they're trying to balance this. And we see this, frankly, and we will see it in the coming months in the evolving relation between Saudi Arabia and Israel, where the Saudis want to engage Israel, want to normalize with Israel, but they want to see progress on the Palestinian front. How they balance this, I think this is going to be an interesting, probably one of the most interesting policy questions as we move forward. Now, let me go to the core of this conflict. Zoom You know, my mind, the Palestinian, if I want to understand the Palestinian-Israeli conflict at its core, it is a conflict between two national movements, Zionism, the idea of Jewish nationalism, the idea that the Jewish people have the right to a state of their own in a piece of land that they have historic connections to, and Palestinian nationalism, the idea that Palestinians are entitled to self-determination in a state of their own in a land that they also have historic connection to. The problem, of course, in this construct is that they both want the same piece of land. They're fighting over the same piece of land. And neither the Zionists nor the Palestinians want simply a state in the kind of legalistic sense, in the sense of, oh, give us a passport and, some institutions. No, they want a state that expresses their national identities. The Zionist movement, the Jewish national movement, wants an Israel that's a Jewish state, an Israel in which they speak Hebrew and they take Jewish holidays off and whatever. I mean, all of these kind of, symbols of nationalism. We want the same, a place that we can. And as a result, the only solution that I can see actually is a two-state solution.
Mhm.
A state for the Palestinians, in which the Palestinians can express their national identity. And of course, Israel exists and it has to exist both as recognized and as a secure member of the region in which the Israelis can express their national identity. And I say this because I'm hearing a lot recently ideas like a one-state solution. Put the Israelis and Palestinians together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and everyone's going to be happy ever after. Nice idea, maybe in theory. In reality, it will face some very serious challenges. This new state, if I want to be a bit banal and say, what's going to be the color of the flag? Is it the blue and white of Israel? Is it our colors? What days do we take off? Actually, more fundamentally, as you write the narrative of this new state, the national narrative, how do you relate to the past? 1948, the year where this conflict started. Will this new one state look at it as a glorious year, the way the Israelis look at it, the year where the diaspora ended, the homeland was reclaimed? Or will it be the way that we look at it, a traumatic year in which we lost land and etc.? So trying to fuse and merge these two together does not work. I say this because, much of the history of this conflict has been about a tension between these two ideas. Even before the conflict started back in the 1930s, what we call the idea of partition, two states, was seen as the only solution. Yet there were attempts by both national movements to eliminate the other and have dominion all over the land from the river to the sea. And both us and the Israelis used every tool in the toolbox to try to assert this. Israelis used military force. Palestinians used terror. The Israelis, some of you who might have read the history books remember that Golda Meir, an Israeli prime minister, said there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, and went ahead to ban, even illegalize, the display of Palestinian national symbols. For our part, we went to the UN, got a resolution that said Zionism is racism. And guess what? The Palestinians have not disappeared. Palestinian nationalism has not disappeared. It's actually gaining more and more traction and recognition. And by the same token, Israel not only survived, it thrived. And so I think ultimately, by the beginning of the century, at least in the policy and diplomatic world, this question was settled, and it was clear that the way forward is a two-state solution. Now, that's a nice term, a nice slogan. The real challenge is how do you get there? And this is a multi-level, multi-layered challenge. Some of it relates to the kind of substance of what a peace deal, ultimately a two-state solution looks like. This was heavily negotiated. I'm happy to get in detail if you wish. Enough to say that there are solutions to all of the kind of substantive, at least solutions, to all of the core issues, Jerusalem, refugees, borders, etc. That's maybe the easier part. And when I say, by the way, easier, this is the Middle East. So easier. Nothing
Yeah.
is easy, but it's doable. The challenges become actually more when it comes to the politics of it. Here, look, I mean, if we look at peacemaking in general, and I want to say the word peace itself, well, the word peace is such a lovely, noble, word that conveys a sense of warmth and fuzziness and all of that good stuff. In reality, peace is actually very hard
Yeah.
because peace entails compromises that often go not only to your core national interest, but even to your core national identity.
Yeah.
To have Palestinian Israeli peace, Israelis will have to accept the division of Jerusalem. Anyone who knows the Jewish or the Israeli narrative will know what a heavy lift that is.
Yeah.
But from our side, it will entail giving up what we call the right of return, the idea that the refugees and their descendants will go to their ancestral homes in what's now Israel. Ain't gonna happen. And anyone who knows the Palestinian national narrative knows what a heavy lift that is. I say this because in order to get peace, you need leaders who actually have a degree of domestic legitimacy that allows them to make these concessions. If you look at who made peace in the Middle East, someone like Anwar Sadat of Egypt, the hero of the 73 war, someone like Itzhak Rabil of Israel, the hero of the 67 war in Israel, King Hussein of Jordan, the founder of modern Jordan. And I can go on and on. These are larger than life figures. Palestinians and Israelis do not have these kinds of leaders, and for a while they have not. So, this is to me the first question. It's really can you get the politics in such a place that you can get this kind of leadership? Then, of course, if I want to then zoom in from this kind of, generality to where we are today, there are immediate challenges. And these challenges, first and foremost, relate to Gaza.
Yeah.
We have a ceasefire in Gaza, and I have to start maybe by saying I give full credit to this to President Trump. I'm
Yeah.
very
Yes.
critical of many aspects of the Trump policy, and I will show this, but this full credit goes to the president. He identified a moment. He has a very good instinct when it comes to identifying moments of opportunity, identified a moment, went for it, and established a framework of peace that starts with a ceasefire. The ceasefire still holds. There are violations, there are escalations, yet they're all contained and it holds because everyone has an interest in it holding. The Israelis do, Hamas does, the region does. And what President Trump did is he got his own credibility on the line by
Yeah.
personally endorsing it, but forced Arab leaders and regional leaders to do the same. When he dragged the Turkish president, the Jordanian king, and everyone to Sharm el-Sheikh to sign, he's basically saying this: if it fails, it's your failure.
Yeah. Very
So,
good.
I am optimistic in terms of this whole ceasefire holding. However, it becomes more complicated if you look of what's going to happen next, what we call the day after. Okay, there's a ceasefire. What happened next? And here there are some very difficult challenges to look at. On the one hand, it's very clear that if you want to move forward on anything, whether it's Gaza reconstruction, whether ultimately on going back to peace, you need Hamas, which is a terror organization recognized as such not only in the US, Israel, and Europe, but many parts of the Arab world. It cannot be part of the picture. First, it has to disarm, and then it has to be marginalized in politics. Again, easier said than done. Easier said than done because, as we saw after 2 years of war, Israel has not managed to disarm Hamas. Any disarmament is a very complicated process. Comparatively, we know this is the case. But it's also very difficult because if you want to politically marginalize Hamas, you have to have an alternative. You can't beat something with nothing, as they say. And in this particular case, in the Palestinian case, the alternative is what we call the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is the governing body that governs the Palestinians in the West Bank. It's the internationally recognized interlocutor. It's an organization that believes in a two-state solution, shuns violence, etc. The problem with it, it's a heavily discredited government. If you look at Palestinian public opinion polls, and this has been consistent for many, many years, more than a decade, 80% of the Palestinians will tell you the Palestinian Authority is corrupt.
Mhm.
Think of it. 4 out of 5 Palestinians you will meet believe
Wow.
their leaders are thieves.
Wow.
Failed. The current president, who's I think 90 or 91 years old, young man, has been in power since '06.
Yeah.
He's now, you do the math, it's a
Yeah.
4-year term, etc. There's a big credibility issue. Then there is a question of what's the role of the international community. President Trump suggested the idea of bringing an international stabilization force. What is the mandate of this force? Will this force be shooting at Hamas? Will it be doing counter-terror, disarmament?
Yeah.
If that's the case, how do you give the authority? Chapter 7 UN, Security Council. There's political questions. I don't know. I mean, I've spoken to many Arab officials, many European officials, and I hear all the time, the question is, can you imagine the optics of our forces shooting at Palestinians or being shot at by Palestinians? This creates political problems back in capitals. So these are all of these kind of issues that are unresolved. The biggest fear that I have right now is the fear that with all of these complexities, Hamas is actually entrenching itself on the ground.
Yeah.
And Robert, I know you're an expert in Lebanon. Exactly what Hezbollah did after, was it the '06 war?
Well,
As the
what's
world.
doing now? What's doing
Exactly.
now?
The
What's doing
international
now?
community is kind of, deliberating and wringing our hands, and the reality on the ground moves on. And particularly that Hamas has regional allies that wanted to actually entrench. Countries like Qatar and Turkey um, are countries that will support Hamas and try it. So these are some of the complexities. I'm gonna maybe conclude with just maybe a couple of points in terms of what are the priorities next as I see them.
Okay.
Obviously, sorting out an international mechanism for dealing with Gaza. There is currently a UN Security Council resolution draft being circulated.
Mhm.
This has to be tight. If it's not tight, then Hamas will say. So that's the first question. Second question, and a very important question, is Palestinian Authority reform. If you do not
Yes.
reform the Palestinian Authority and make it appealing, first and foremost, to its own public, but also to the donor community, to the region, then we're not going to go anywhere. And finally, there's a question. Look, much as I give credit to President Trump, we know that the U.S. right now doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with this in a sustained manner. Our institutions have been weakened. The State Department, the intelligence community, etc. It's really top-driven policy from the president and a very, very small circle around him, Steve Witkoff, Secretary Rubio, etc. We don't have the bandwidth for it. So it's going to be regional. So the question here is, who's going to lead the regional effort? Is it countries like Qatar and Turkey that ultimately will be pushing the Islamist agenda of Hamas? Or is it countries like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates? These are countries that are going through a major transformation, a transformation that I think is generational in its impact.
Yeah.
Countries that are moving away from ideology that has basically colored Arab politics really since maybe the 1930s to a much more pragmatic, state-centric, and who are very, very opposed to Islamism and to terror. So these are the three sets of big questions that, depending on how they're answered, I will either share Professor Olmert's optimism or I'll go back to my typical cynicism.
So tell me, if you want to sum up now, if you want to tell me something in one sentence, how do you look at it? Do you want to hope, or you are cautiously hoping, or you are hoping?
Look, for the first time in
Yeah.
2 years, I'm
Yes.
hopeful.
Okay. All right.
Not optimistic, by the way. Optimistic means that I think things will sort out. Hopeful, I see a real opening. And
Omar, let me tell you this, really, guys. I really share your views, especially regarding hope. And I'll tell you why, because I've never seen a consensus among the Arabs. And I would say the Arabs and the Muslim states, I've never seen that before, even during the Oslo, even during the Madrid peace process. So really what I see now, and I share with you the same thing, that President Trump really has created a framework, an excellent framework. And this is where I hope he'll always be consistent. I think mainly when I think about him, I think it's his legacy and he wants to do it. That's his last term. And I think really he's going to move forward. And then again, this is what I share with you something is that, it's mainly now the Arab world. What's the Arab world is going to do? How he's going to bring him to task to doing it. Now, there is something you mentioned about Saudi Arabia and UAE, and you mentioned something about Qatar and Turkey. What about Egypt? Egypt knows more than anybody else. Do you envision, Egyptian forces going there? And there is something also, and ironic, really. Let's not forget, Egypt designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, really. And it's sit down, on the negotiating table with them. So mainly, what the role of Egypt, and what do you think that what Egypt can do and will do, guys?
Okay,
at this time, really.
I mean, a couple of maybe background comments, and then, first of all, I mean, to understand Egypt, you have to understand two things. First of all, today Egypt is in an identity crisis. Egypt typically was the center of the Arab world. I mean, they think they're the center of the universe, but I'm not going to go there. And they've been the center of Arab diplomacy, Arab politics, Arab culture. Well, guess what? The center of gravity is moving elsewhere. Today, the center of gravity is Saudi and the Gulf.
Yeah, it moved. Yeah.
And I tell you, the Egyptians are not dealing with this very well. They're trying to assert themselves, and they see the Gaza case as a way of asserting themselves, though they don't necessarily have the means to assert themselves. So that's kind of one kind of background note to keep in mind here. The second thing is, look, when it comes to specifically the question of sending out troops to Gaza, Egypt has been scarred and traumatized by its experience of sending troops to Yemen. Was it in the 60s?
Yeah, in 60s. Yes, it was Nasser.
That was Nasser. And from that time, yes. it has become almost, an article of faith in Egyptian national security doctrine that we don't send troops overseas. They do send them, in soft peacekeeping missions, but not in peace enforcement missions. Very hard. And I was talking to a number of Egyptian officials recently, both from the Foreign Ministry and the intelligence services, which are the two key actors when it comes to this. And they were both adamant that they may be willing to send troops to train Palestinians, to do kind of, border security, but not to do enforcement. It's very hard to see it. Now, the one area which is going to be very interesting is Egypt is angling to get a major part of the reconstruction efforts in Gaza. There's going to be a lot of money being poured if we get to reconstruction. And they understand that they might need to deploy military forces to protect their reconstruction. So that's an interesting space to play with. But by and large, they're not going there. Now, with Hamas, I have to say, they do have a genuine dilemma, because you're absolutely right. They look at Hamas as a terrorist organization, an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood. More than that, actually, in the beginning of the Arab Spring, Hamas was involved in terror attacks inside Egypt. That's a fact. Yet at the same time, they want stability in Gaza. And what my Egyptian friends tell me, okay, look, I'm a hardliner. I believe that Hamas has to be obliterated militarily, politically, etc.
I share that with you.
And so my Egyptian friends tell me, we share this with you. However, tell us exactly how to do it. There is no, and this is where I feel the US is almost losing momentum. They're telling me there's no international force yet in place. They're telling me there is no alternative governance, civilian governance structure, which was envisioned in the Trump plan, but never came to fruition as of yet. There is no board of peace, the idea that President Trump presented of an international board to oversee all of this. So the Egyptians are saying, if we cannot have full international engagement, the only way we can move forward is to solve these issues through a political agreement with Hamas. Now, I worry about it because I think any political agreement with Hamas will give Hamas legitimacy. Yet at the same time, I find it hard to go to my Egyptian friends and say, wag my finger at them without giving them an alternative. But
Yeah.
I think unless the US creates an alternative, and that's why this UN Security Council resolution will be key, I fear that Egypt and others will drift towards the path of least resistance, and that is to reach some sort of partial understanding with
Hmm.
Hamas. And that, I believe, would be catastrophic.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I worry also, given what the King Hussein has said, if we are going, well, first he said he's not going to go there, but mainly before he said that, he said, listen, the peacekeeping force, sorry, the force is going to be there, especially if it's going to be Arab. It's not going to be about, enforcing the peace. It's about peacekeeping. And this is what I got worried. And really, my worry is now, where these forces gonna come from? I know that the president is speaking with Indonesia, with Azerbaijan, Turkey. I think Israel is gonna veto it, and already it's vetoed it. It's not gonna go there. But now, really, now you have a serious problem where you are going to have a force to go into Gaza, if Egypt especially is gonna be part of it. And I can take you that, Omar. I was still in Lebanon, and I was serving in the Red Cross when the Syrian forces went in. Really, you had, when it turned into the Arab deterrence force, you had some Saudi, some from the Gulf, but really they did not have a role. The only roles that played really to do something were the Syrian forces. So this is why, I really, I don't know. I hope this gonna be surmounted, because I think it's crucial. And I don't know here, mainly, the Arab world is pushing for mainly, for United Nations to go ahead and have, chapter 6 and 7, especially chapter 7, that will allow them to use force. So this is mainly now, it's really a big issue, and I hope it's gonna be surmountable soon. But I share your concern totally. Let me move now to Lebanon. Lebanon, I don't know if you had I know how busy you are, really. But Lebanon today has issued an open letter, and it reminded me of the open letter of 1985, really a disastrous open letter. And that open letter today, what they said, listen, and of course, it was issued to the president, mainly to the president of Lebanon, the prime minister, and the speaker of the house. They said, listen, given what's going on, we are reaffirming our right for resistance. This is mainly, if you want to boil it. And here myself, I read it and I say, my God, they are condemning Lebanon to another God knows how many years. And at the same time, they are speaking about reconstruction. And I know that Israel is not going to withdraw. And I know that Israel is going to hit them anywhere. Do you have something to say about Lebanon, how this really problem, and it's a huge problem. Do you have any idea about Lebanon and Israel and about Hezbollah?
Okay, with the caveat that I'm not
Yeah.
an expert on Lebanon, and
Oh,
especially
you are an expert, guys. Trust me.
Lebanon is so messy that, but I'll give you a few maybe overall
Okay.
views. First of all, Israel after October 7th is not the Israel before October
Correct.
7th. I
Absolutely
mean,
right.
this is when I talk to Israeli very
Yeah.
senior military intelligence, in addition to political people, their mindset has shifted.
Yeah.
I think October 7th, we look at it as a geostrategic moment, and of course it was, but it was a psychological moment. I
Yes.
think in Israel, the sense of vulnerability, which is an emotional, psychological sense, they are the strongest country in the region, yet they feel vulnerable. And right
Yeah.
now, they're unwilling to take any risks. And
Yes.
therefore, I think, what they were willing to accept in the past, what the late Hassan Nasrallah used to call, deterrence for deterrence, or whatever he used to
Yeah.
call it. عدالة الردع.
The deterrence of terror. This is what he said
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And unless there is disarmament of
Correct.
Hezbollah, I fear that the war is gonna come in. So that's the first point.
Yeah.
Again, keep in mind, Israel is not the same Israel.
Yes.
Secondly, the Gulf is not the same Gulf.
Yeah.
In the past, much of the Gulf, the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia, used to basically, you have a problem, here's a check.
Yeah.
Today,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia it's going through a number of things. First of all, they have a very ambitious and very transformational, and I feel, I mean, in regional perspective, probably the most important development happening is what's happening in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
This Vision 2030. They want to transform Saudi economy, but also the Saudi role and also culture and reinterpreting Islam and all of these things that are key, I think, to regional stabilization. Now, part of this, they're saying, look, no more free lunches. We're not an ATM. They are
Yeah.
not willing to invest in anything unless certain conditions are met.
Yeah.
One of the conditions is actually reform.
Yes.
They're fed up with the corruption. They pay so that Lebanese or Palestinian politicians buy another palace somewhere on Lake Geneva. That's one. But two, I think those countries have also developed a very strong aversion to terrorism.
Yeah.
You
Correct.
know, they used to play footsies with terrorism, and 9/11 came. 9/11 was a clarifying moment for them. And I think since then, they has shifted. They're not willing to engage in anything that will ultimately find its way to supporting a terror organization.
Yeah.
Three, basically, they don't want, for them, even though there is some detente with Iran right now, the reality, they look at Iran still as the major regional, not only competitor, I would even
Correct.
say enemy and threat.
Yeah.
And they will not be bankrolling Lebanon so that Hezbollah, which is Iranian proxy, gets to benefit from it. I tell you all of this basically to say that if Hezbollah is not disarmed and if Hezbollah is not out of the game,
Yeah.
then don't expect support from
Yeah.
the region, and we might be going where we are. Now, one last point, and this is maybe my uninformed value judgment on Lebanon. I have often heard from Lebanese politicians that I come across a sense of, how shall I say it, abdicating responsibility, asking someone else to do
Yeah.
their
Their
heavy
job.
lifting for them.
Yeah.
Doesn't work anymore. And I think, frankly, as I talk to Saudi, Emirati officials, today, the main thing that I hear from them is, if you're not willing to help yourself, we're not going to help you.
Yes.
They look at Syria. They saw this new leader. He's trying to create something new. They said, you know what, we'll invest in you. They look to a place like Lebanon, or for that matter, the Palestinian Authority, corrupt, lacking in initiative, and they're saying, you know what, we're not going to waste money on you. So I think this is something that countries like Lebanon and certainly like the Palestinian Authority have to internalize. Unless you take the initiative and have a degree of self and show that you're willing to do the heavy lifting, you will not get any help. And the Israelis right now, as I said, as I started by saying, they're not in a mood to take any risks, and they will use force.
As a matter of fact, I fully agree with you. And I can tell you this, I have met, as a matter of fact, you have some leaderships that came to see me here in Boca, Christian leadership and others. I have been on the media and I tell them, listen, you have two choices between remaining a farm, really, this is what it is with Hezbollah, or mainly, really transform Lebanon by disarming Hezbollah, by ending the corruption into somehow decent democracy in Lebanon. And what I worry about really, and again, what I'm worried about is that, and I fully agree with you, that really the determination and the will of the political leaders of Lebanon is not there. They all worry about civil war. I agree with them, worry about civil war, but that doesn't mean you don't go ahead and face something that is going to be worse than the civil war, really, because Lebanon is going to be in the abyss. Nobody's going to care about it. And Tom Barak, guys, already mentioned it, Mortagos, everybody. And I can tell you this, even the president, told them, listen, I'm going to help you despite the shutdown. He sent to the Lebanese army $240 million when you have a shutdown here. So they are showing them all kind of support. And then, like you said, exactly, they are waiting for somebody else from the outside to do their job. And I tell them, shame on you. Shame on you. Now, let me ask you one final question, and then I'm going to open, the floor for question. Syria, and you mentioned something about Syria. Al-Shara, really, as someone who has written about Salafism, about radical Islam, about this, I am really, I am in a, I don't know what to say. I am really, my head is still turning, and I'm looking at what he's doing. What he's doing really is merely, he has shown he's a pragmat, but at the same time, I really, his popular base, his government base, his governmental base, what happened in the coast, what happened in the south, what's happening now with the Kurds. So I see a lot of contradictions. So please, can you enlighten us about Syria, and what could happen really in Syria, including mainly, I would say, which I see it coming, a security agreement between Israel and Syria.
Well, no, I can't enlighten you because I'm as confused as you are. But I will again maybe give you some pointers. But before I do that, I want to actually just react to the last thing you said before this.
Please.
You know, successful states at some point reach a moment in which they have to clarify who they are and what they stand for, and often by the use of force. I've seen it in so many nations. You get to a point where competing narratives and competing agendas that are irreconcilable try to shape the future of what the state looks like. States that deal with this and with conclude it early on tend to be successful. Those that basically waffle tend to be failed states. In Israel, early on in the actually very, very early days of the establishment of Israel, there was an attempt by some of the pre-state militias to basically maintain their arms. It was called the Altalena incident.
Yes.
And, actually at that time, a young, I think he was a captain by the name of Itzhak Rabin, basically fired on this Jewish
Yes,
ship.
and a number died.
And a number died. And that clarified one authority here.
Exactly.
In Jordan, early on, there
Exactly.
was a rebellion by some tribes called the Adwan tribe. And the king, with the British help, actually was very brutal in putting it down. And ever since, it's been a stable country. In the US, we had that, and we called it the Civil War.
The Civil War.
And we had Kaladi. And I think both for you in Lebanon and in Palestine, for us, if we don't clarify who we are, what we stand for, where's the authority, we will continue being failed states. So I just wanted to say this. Now, when it comes to Syria, look, like you, I am someone whose whole political career and policy career has been defined by opposition to Islamists, from the Muslim Brotherhood brand to the Salafi brand. However, I look at what's happening in Syria and I actually see a number of things. First of all, I see someone, Shara, the president, who's evolving, at least in terms of his narrative, in terms of some of his policies. So I'm not seeing someone who's so far showing the rigid ideologue. I see an opening. And when you have someone who's evolving, as you said, he is subject to many, many pushes and pulls and limitations. His base, the coalition that got him to power, that is many of whom are Islamists, etc. So the role of the outside right now is to support and reward good behavior and good policies, and punish and put a cost on bad policies. And in this regard, I actually do think that the US administration is doing the right job. Personally, I would have liked the president to maybe slow down a bit the normalization, but I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Now we have the carrots. We have to make sure that the sticks are clear. I also, frankly, give the Syrian government some leeway. I mean, this is a country that has been in civil war since what, 2011, 2012?
2011. Yes.
Yeah. So, and before the civil war, it was also, in isolation since the 1960s. Shara, who's going to be here next week, I think, in Washington next week, the first Syrian president to visit Washington, gives you a sense. I say this because it is normal in these kind of circumstances to have instability. It's hard to exert full control.
Correct.
I'm not an expert enough to tell you if it's really a question of capacity or a question of will, but I'm willing to give him some leeway. So we have to create a structure of incentive and disincentive. Now, part of the structure as well, and I want to zoom out here to the region, there's also competition about who is going to shape
Yeah.
Syria's trajectory. You have Turkey on the one hand, Turkey, which was actually a big sponsor of Sharia,
Yeah.
that has actual equities when it comes to Syria, particularly in the north, whether it's territorial, whether it's the refugees, whether it's the Kurds. So it has solid, national security interests here, but also one that wants to extend Turkish hegemony in the region, and a Turkish hegemony that has a very strong Islamist tinge,
Yeah.
not a Salafi one, but more of a Muslim Brotherhood thing.
Yes, correct.
So that's kind of one outside pull that's coming in. And then you have the other one, which is the Saudis and the Emiratis in particular,
Yeah.
who see in Syria a potential for a Levantine country that will sever the link between Hezbollah and Iran, one that could be a block against Turkish expansionism, etc. And Shara is playing both sides so far. His first foreign trip was to Saudi Arabia. It was the Saudis who introduced him to Trump, not the Turks. Yet the Turks also continue to play a big role. I say this because whoever ends up being the dominant outside power in Syria will have a huge stake. Is Syria going to be a modern Arab state, follow the kind of path of modernization that has been charted by the Emiratis and the Saudis, or is it going to be an extension of Islamism? Which
Yeah.
right now, I think, with the weakening of Iran, I think Turkey sees an opportunity to push its brand of Islamism in the region. So I don't know, but what I do know here is that also we have an opportunity. For the first time in many years, in Syria, we have an opening. The last point here is where is Israel? And I think Israel is really playing it badly, to be
Mhm.
frank. I mean, when Israel degraded Iran's capabilities during the last two wars, first with hitting the proxies and then with hitting Iran's nuclear program, the 12-day war, I think the region, the Arab world, were quite happy with this.
Mhm.
We're saying, you know what, Israel, you're dealing with some of our problems. However, with the way that Israel right now is undermining Sharia through military means, and then, of course, when they hit Qatar, which is a very
Yes.
complicated
Yes.
story, there's a growing image in moderate Arab countries that Israel is a destabilizing force. That's very dangerous if you look at the future possibility of regional integration. I do think, and I will conclude with this point, your last
Okay.
point. I do think, though, that I think the US is again on the right track when it comes to this. They are pushing for this some sort of a security deal. It's not easy. And I don't know the details, but we were expecting it to happen before in September before the General Assembly. It fell through, I think, mainly because
Mhm.
the Israelis were not budging. But now we see the US putting equities in the game.
Yeah.
Just today, there was an announcement that there will be is American presence in Damascus, military presence in Damascus, that will oversee this. And
Yeah.
hopefully, the Americans will mediate between Israel and Syria, will give the Syrians enough assurances that they will be deterring Israel, but also will give Israel enough assurances they'll be monitoring Syrian behavior. As a tangent here, where we are seeing, and this is maybe more for you as academics to look at, we are seeing more and more American reliance on the
Yes.
military, not as an enforcement tool, but also as um,
Supervisor. Really?
a supervisor,
Yeah.
stabilizer. You saw it in Lebanon with
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
committee. We're seeing it in Gaza right now, and we're seeing it in Syria. That's a very interesting development that is promising, but also concerning in many ways. So, with this, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to
Listen,
the
guys, really, I
conversations.
really thank you so much. Really, as a matter of fact, it was indeed a very insightful, the interview and your talk was very good, and not only that, it has depths, really, and it has intelligence and it has so much knowledge. I really thank you. And now I'm gonna open the floor for questions. So please, if you have a question for all who are attending this lecture now online, and it's gonna be taped, recorded. I'm gonna put it again on the website of the program. So please write your question, and let me see if I have a question here. As a matter of fact, let me see what do I have. Okay, this is from Dr. Renat. What do you think it will take to sustain the ongoing ceasefire and extend it into a prolonged peace? And I have another question also.
You would require, first and foremost, the creation of this international stabilization force with enough of a strong mandate that will give the Israelis enough confidence that they will do something. But it also will require the Israelis then to play ball. And when they see results, that they should also scale back their footprint. None of this is going to happen without the US remaining highly involved. And I do believe, from a very, very practical point of view, we need to have an empowered American point person to deal with this, because the president will not have the attention span or the bandwidth or the prioritization to deal with this. And neither will Steve Witkoff, who has, two other big portfolios he will inform with. So that's the first thing I would require. Two, it requires the creation of a political alternative to Hamas. Whether this comes through the reform of the Palestinian Authority, and by reform, I mean starting from the very, very top, political reform, i.e., get rid of the current president, to actually functional reform. And if that doesn't work, then let's see if this Gaza Civilian Governance Committee can be empowered and beefed up and gain political legitimacy to be a political alternative to Hamas. Short of that, Hamas will find a way to come in. And three, it requires, ideally, countries like Saudi Arabia to volunteer and UAE to volunteer to take a leading role in this whole process, not necessarily through deployment of troops, but through political engagement, etc. And if they don't want to do it, this is one thing that the US should push them to do it. Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, is going to be in Washington on the 18th of November, I believe. I think the 18th. And that should be, I think, one of the points that the US, that the president should push him. Because if we don't do that, if we give it to the Turks and the Qataris, then we know what's going to happen. By the way, again, Robert, I go back to Lebanon experience after the 06 war, when Qatar was allowed to lead a lot of the reconstruction. Well, guess who was the beneficiary? It certainly wasn't the Lebanese state.
Yeah. I have another question here. Is there a role to other great and regional powers like the Europeans, Russian, or the Chinese in the region?
Yes and no. I mean, let me start with the no and then start with the yes. I think sometimes we overstate this great power competition question, particularly in the Middle East. It is imminently obvious that the only country that still retains full power in the region is the United States, because the US is the only country that is willing and able to be a security guarantor in the region. Full stop. The Chinese are making inroads and blah, blah, blah. When push came to shove, where were the Chinese? They reached a deal with the Houthis so that the Houthis in Yemen, so the Houthis don't target Chinese ships going through the Red Sea. And that's the extent of it. And the region knows that.
The Russians.
The Russians, first of all, the vaunted Russian military is still struggling in Ukraine. Russia right now is struggling to maintain a foothold, whether in Syria or maybe in North Africa, but that's the extent of their regional ambitions. Everyone knows that. The great Russian air defense systems proved how great they are in Iran, where the Israelis took them out and have full air superiority. So Russia is not a major player here. I say this, though, again, with the understanding that particularly when it comes to China will continue to have a major economic role. I mean, it's the biggest trading partner, the Gulf, and all of that kind of stuff. And I think the US has become, and we started seeing this really towards the end of the Biden administration. They understood that you cannot tell the Gulf or the Egyptians to have no economic relations with Chinese, but you can regulate these relations to ensure that you don't have relations, in the area of overlap between economy and national security. no Huawei infrastructure in near American bases and stuff like this.
Yeah.
The most interesting player here, frankly, is the Europeans. And the
Yeah.
Europeans, I think, look, I mean, it's very clear the Europeans cannot lead.
Hmm.
Even in Lebanon, where France has,
Yeah.
probably
Correct.
the
Okay.
strongest.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into why that's the
No,
case.
they
What
play a
have
secondary role now. They don't have the power like before. Really.
exactly. It's a secondary role. And here I think this requires, how shall I say it, maturity from the Europeans and the United States. From the Europeans, the maturity to understand that they will be playing second fiddle, but they have a lot to play in that role. And from the US, to also understand that leadership does not mean monopoly. Yes, we have to lead, but to lead effectively, we can bring the Europeans where they have value added. Can bring the Arabs where they have value added. And in this case, I think the Europeans have two sets of value added. One is economic, for sure, assistance, technical support for governance, institution building, that kind of stuff. Also, European countries do have good relations with some of the Arab countries. Certainly, I look at the Palestinian case, and I see that they have good political leverage vis-a-vis the Palestinians, and they can use that. If we want the US to have leverage vis-a-vis Israel, which I think is absolutely legitimate, we need us, the Europeans, to have
Yeah.
leverage, use their leverage vis-a-vis some of their Arab partners, be it in Palestine, be it in Lebanon, or elsewhere.
All right, very good. All right, another questions, and if there are no more questions, I will be thankful and will be done. Do you think that there is a momentum for diplomatic recognition of Israel by Muslim countries? And here, mainly, I look at two countries, Pakistan and Indonesia. Pakistan and Indonesia. And I can tell you this, Indonesia, as a matter of
Um,
fact, during the United Nations, really, I heard them, and he was totally different than before. His discourse completely different than the discourse that Indonesia had before. So please, Pakistan and Indonesia.
um, Pakistan,
Yeah.
not gonna happen.
Yeah, I
Okay,
understand.
that's easy.
Yes. Yeah.
Pakistan, it's if when the Saudis normalize, the Pakistanis will normalize.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
the clear linkage here. I don't know enough about Indonesia, but
Yeah.
I would like you. I was very surprised when he said in his the president said in his speech,
Yeah.
shalom,
Yes.
towards
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it was reported, but I know it was accurate that the Indonesian president was planning to stop in Israel,
Uh-huh.
either on his way to Sharm el-Sheikh when President Trump went to Sharm el-Sheikh a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
or on his way back from Sharm el-Sheikh. And the reason he did not stop is because the Israelis leaked it and made it problematic for him.
Mhm.
I say this to kind of convey two things. One thing is I think Indonesia is a fascinating and a good candidate for maybe not full normalization. I don't see them fully normalizing for the Saudis,
Yeah.
but for building relations that fall short of normalization but are still significant, economic, cultural, etc. The other point, though, and by the way, here again is a footnote. I mean, Indonesia has a very interesting Islamist movement
Yeah.
that is different from the Levantine or Arab Islam that much more open, much more pluralistic, etc. But the other point here is for normalization, it takes two to tango.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately, Prime Minister Netanyahu through small little petty games like this, leaking a meeting, something like this, has lost trust from many, many regional leaders.
Mhm.
And unless Israel respects the fact that its potential partners have their own limitations, their own politics, their own needs, and Israel should be attentive to this and sensitive to this, and they continue this kind of very brash approach, they are losing some potential allies. I can tell you, again, not by knowledge, but by analysis, I doubt that the Indonesian president will take another risk on Netanyahu. So
Okay.
the way Israeli politics goes in the future will have huge impact on the willingness of partners who want to engage with Israel as a state, whether or not they're going to be willing to take the risk with Israel as a political system.
All right. Guys, really, I thank you very much for today. It has been really not only insightful, it's like really, it was a comprehensive talk, and you had really the answers right there on mark. So I thank you, and good luck for your day today. You are traveling, and I hope I will see you here on campus soon in the future. And I will look forward, and I hope that our paths will cross soon. Guys, I thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. Pleasure and
Thank you,
honor.
guys. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Really, thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Have a great one.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye. Cheers. Bye-bye. What do you need to do now? Here.